Hello and welcome into the 24/7 Sports Football Recruiting Podcast. I'm National Recruiting Analyst Petagna alongside 24/7 Sports Director of Scouting Andrew Ivins. Happy Tuesday. We've got a great show for you today. A lot of quarterback talk as we'll get into quarterbacks that could make an immediate impact here in 2024. We'll also talk about the arms in 2025. Julian Lewis, Antoine Hill, Kayin Russell. 2026 getting busy as well. So a lot of quarterback talk today. Into the show, we'll get into some questions as well. But Drew, I was thinking about you. I was thinking about immediate impact quarterbacks. I was looking at all these names of the crop that we had last year. Arch Manning, Nico Iamaleava, Dante Moore. You go down the list. There's some talented names, but the guy that I kind of thought about you was Anthony Colandrea, and it was a guy that you liked. He was committed to Middle Tennessee State, goes to UVA, starts 6 games, had 2 games over 300 passing yards. Just kind of goes to show it could be anybody, right? It doesn't have to be anybody at the top of the board, but Anthony Colandrea, Jalen Raynor, I don't know. What do you think about that?
It's kind of funny, Coop. Was deep in a dynasty, fantasy football kind of watch list, and Anthony Colandrea was in there ahead of some of guys like Austin Mack. I don't know about that. Anthony Colandrea, he's a gamer. He's a risk taker. We knew that in high school, and I think the entire world got to see that this past season at Virginia. And certainly it was circumstantial in the fact that took some injuries for him to get on the field, but we were a guy that thought he was going to play a fun style of football, and we saw it. So I'm excited to see here in this upcoming season which freshmen are on the field, Coop. And you constructed this list on CBSSports.com. It probably wasn't easy, and it's really a small fraternity of quarterbacks that you think could play as true freshmen.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's the funny part about it. You look at the list, we'll get into it in a second, but a lot of these guys are guys that we kind of highlighted. I mean, you think about the guys at the top, you think about guys certainly like DJ Lagway, Dylan Raiola, Walker White. I mean, you're talking about 3 of the top 5 quarterbacks in the country. Deondrae Williams, certainly another name that comes up, and then with Julian Sayin as well. So we'll get into that list in a second. Just a quick reminder, you are locked in to the 24/7 Sports Football Recruiting Podcast. You can find us on the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. You can also find us on X every Tuesday and Wednesday at noon Eastern Time. Make sure to like and subscribe. And as we always do, we'll take questions at the end of the show. So make sure you get those questions in. And Drew, let's go back to the article. Like Drew said, you can find that on CBSSports.com. I enjoyed this, and we got this kind of idea from Chris Trapasso, who covers the NFL for CBS Sports, and he was talking about guys that could make a leap in their second year, but what about some guys that could make an impact as freshmen? And we'll pull up that full screen for you again. Here are the 5 guys that I kind of listed, and we kind of went through these guys categorically, but let's start at the top. Unlikely, but crazier things have happened. I want to start with Walker White. And Drew, this guy, the number 41 player in the country, number 5 quarterback. You look at Auburn and you think about the second year on the Plains under Hugh Freeze. Peyton Thorne coming back from another year, the second year transfer from Michigan State. He's got 38 starts under his belt. We've seen a little bit of Hank Brown. We've seen a little bit of your guy, Holden Gariner. Walker White, to me, kind of falls because he has all the physical traits that you could want in the position. 6'3", 220 pounds. He was kind of the apple of our eye throughout the evaluation process. You and I really pressed to get him into the All-American Bowl, and we're glad that we did. We got to see glimpses of him and what he can do during the spring showcase for Auburn. Drew, this is not a guy that I would expect to see a lot of. But you think about the physical ability, not only the arm talent, but the raw athleticism as a runner, the way that he is built physically, he is ready for the rigors of the SEC football. I think they can kind of use him in a different way. You saw Robbie Ashford, Peyton Thorne last year. Both those guys kind of give you something different. But if Hugh Freeze is looking to get creative, especially in short yardage, goal line situations, I wouldn't mind giving Walker White, a guy that's kind of a raw developmental guy, a little bit of taste of the SEC as a true freshman.
You mentioned that All-American Bowl evaluation. I mean, that was so key for him. And Eric Richards, who heads up the selection process, he was a bit hesitant, and he admitted it. But after that first AAB practice, when he saw Walker White throw the 2 ball, he turned to me and said, okay, I see it now. And Walker White, we saw a little bit of it in Auburn's spring game, Coop. I think you're right, and it's maybe situational packages. I mean, this was a kid that was on my freaks list. He grew up and in the summers was doing P90X and he is built, and you've always used this comp, Will Levis, in terms of he is a muscular quarterback, and he can beat you with his legs, but he also wants to sit in the pocket and air it out. I just think about Auburn, all the talent they've added on the defensive side of the ball, what they have brought in at wide receiver. I think it's still going to be difficult for them to light up scoring boards, and Walker White could be a cheat code of sorts in terms of, okay, we bring him in, and it's going to give the defense a different look. So you're right, not likely. But I wouldn't be surprised if he avoids that redshirt season, right? What is it, 4 games he can appear in and still preserve a year of eligibility?
Yes, and just remember, I'm looking at some of the comments in the chats. There's some talk about Aiden Childs. Remember, this is true freshmen. This is not redshirt freshmen. So these are guys that are going to play their first year of college football. But Walker White, Drew, what do you think about that Will Levis comp? I just think he's going to be like a household name in scouting circles here relatively soon. I think a lot of people are going to look at him. They're going to get flashes of him. The more and more ball that he plays, I think people are going to kind of like salivate over the idea. And the funny thing about Levis is Levis went from this guy that was in a lot of scouting circles, really kind of a projected top 10 draft choice. He ends up becoming the first pick of the second round, kind of goes through the whole thing in the green room, doesn't hear his name called. Goes to a good situation in Tennessee. Obviously, they've had the coaching change there, but now he's kind of the guy that they're building around. Walker White, to me, just in terms of where they are in a physical trajectory tools, seems like that kind of guy. Like I see it as like a very comparable trajectory for what we can expect of Walker White. Too much too soon could be detrimental, but if they pace him well enough, I think Walker White can be the crown jewel, the foundational piece for Auburn, because I love everything that they're doing around him.
Well, I think the first time you threw out that player comp, Auburn fans were not happy. It'll be interesting to see what those people are thinking come October, right? Because Will Levis, certainly a ton of hype around him heading into his sophomore year in the NFL. So I love it, Cooper. I think you nailed it on the head, and the measurables are exact, right? 6'3", both right around 225 pounds. So I think you nailed it there.
All right, the next one, worth keeping your eye on, or as CBS put it, don't say we didn't warn you. That's from our editor, Trey Scott. Julian Sayin, Ohio State. And this one is pretty interesting, Drew, because you look at Julian Sayin, the 5-star out of Carlsbad High School in California, signed with Alabama. Nick Saban retires 9 days later. He's in the transfer portal. He finds a soft landing spot with Ryan Day in Ohio State. And you look at Ohio State and you look at the implications of a really pressurized 7th year for Ryan Day in Columbus. This is an interesting room here and an interesting team, because it seems to me, just like every year, but really this year, Ohio State has the team and all the pieces to compete for a national championship. Rarely do you look at Ohio State's quarterback room and say, I don't know if they have enough, but they've kind of pieced it together a little bit. Will Howard comes over from Kansas State in the transfer portal. Outside of that, you got Devin Brown, former highly touted recruit out of Utah, hasn't really done much. Lincoln Kineholz from South Dakota, really kind of on the developmental track. You have Aaron Nolan, another talented freshman. And then there's Julian Sayin, but Drew, out of all the situations that a true freshman could walk into, there's a lot of experience coming back for the Buckeyes. Chip Kelly, Julian Sayin's skill set kind of fits to me in terms of a guy that's a high-level distributor, has a really good command, feel for the offense. You got guys like Jeremiah Smith and Emeka Egbuka walking around. This is something for a true freshman quarterback to step into. You look around and say, hey, we're really not going to ask you to do that much other than really just kind of stay ahead of the chains. I don't know if we'll get there, but there is a case. And I kind of talked to some people around Columbus like, hey, you know, it's not a priority, but we'd love to get this guy some run. So I do think there's some intrigue there with Julian Sayin playing early in Columbus.
I think that says a lot, right? Because you read off the list of quarterbacks, and I know some people have dismissed Lincoln Kineholz for what they saw from him in the bowl game, which I think is a bit unfair. I mean, we're talking about a backup quarterback, a kid that wasn't expected to play, thrust into action against a Missouri squad that had plenty of motivation to win that contest. I mean, no one opted out from their side of things. I mean, they were dialed up. We know Missouri, they brought the pressure up front. I thought that was a little bit of an unfair kind of evaluation for Lincoln Kineholz. So Julian Sayin shows up there in Columbus, right? I think he's the second true freshman to lose his black stripe during spring practices right after Jeremiah Smith, who lost it in record time. And what has the returns been? Hey, this kid's ready to go. This kid's ready to go. To me, that's surprising, just given that the other arms that are in the building there, what we know about them, what we liked about them coming out of high school. But then you think about it, you go back to the Elite 11 finals last summer where Julian Sayin was the MVP, our alpha dog for the event. You think of his senior season, a guy that takes care of the football, limited interceptions. He can work under center, play in a more advanced type of system, and the ball placement is there. So, would it be surprising to see him out there? Yeah, for sure. But I think you could talk yourself into a path onto the field for Ohio State. And you look at the schedule, some early, easy games. Why isn't he playing in the fourth quarter?
As an objective, kind of like third-party opinion here, you look at Alabama, Nick Saban, let's say that band stays together, Tommy Rees right now. You got Chip Kelly, Ryan Day at Ohio State. Do you like Julian Sayin's situation better now or what it would have been under Nick Saban, Tommy Rees, in terms of how that really kind of fits his future?
Well, that's the other thing I was going to bring up. Remember Bill O'Brien, briefly at Ohio State, from what I gathered, really good relationship with Julian Sayin, and then now he's off to Boston College. I would maybe lean towards the Nick Saban situation, but the receivers at Ohio State, how do they want to move Julian Sayin around? What about you? I mean, where do you stand on that?
It's interesting. I kind of look at it. I think Alabama and Ohio State are in a comparable spot in terms of just the quarterback room. What happens after a Jalen Milroe? What happens after a Will Howard? You look at Ohio State. Will Howard's got 27 starts. I like Will Howard. Can he be the guy to take him to the promised land? I don't know, but I think he's got physical tools. You obviously see the intrigue in a guy like Will Howard. Outside of that, you look at Ohio State's quarterback room, Devin Brown's got one start. We've seen a little bit of Lincoln Kineholes, maybe a little bit too soon. And then you got Aaron Nolan. This sets up really well for Julian Sayin, not only this year, but years past it as well. And you talk about the other guy that you're going to link up with, the guy that we called a generational talent in Jeremiah Smith. If you believe you're that guy at the quarterback position, I don't know if there's a better spot. I think they need to consistently improve across the offensive line. They got some experience coming back there, but like Judkins, Travion Henderson, obviously those guys will be gone after this year, but Ohio State consistently has shown that they can put their quarterbacks in a really healthy situation. We talk about it all the time, play calling, protection, playmakers. I think Ohio State has done a fantastic job there, and I think Alabama's going to do a really good job. But Alabama right now, getting Caden Proctor back was huge. They're super young, very inexperienced at the receiver position, so you could make the case as of right now Ohio State is a little bit more healthy of a situation. So we'll watch out for Julian Sayin. Drew, another one. How about Damon Williams? Talking about the All-American Bowl, these guys representing University of Washington, originally signed with Arizona out of high school with Jedd Fisch. He follows Jedd Fisch to Montlake. Damon Williams, that guy, listed at 5'11", 185 pounds. So is Noah Fafita. Drew, I doubt it. I think we had him at like 5'9.5" at the All-American Bowl. But Noah Fafita is the comp of the four-star quarterback, the number 19 quarterback in 2024. A lot to like with this kid. He gets the gamer tag, maybe because he's under 6 feet. We love the way that he plays. We love the command. He went to the All-American Bowl. He's one of those guys kind of in the conversation for the MVP race. You talked about Anthony Calandria earlier in the show, really kind of it being circumstantial at UVA. If we saw Damon Williams, I think that would be the case. I think things have really started to move in his direction in terms of he put a good spring together. He got there. He's battling Will Rogers. This would be his first year as a starter transferring from Mississippi State. Massive turnover there with a national championship roster, a lot of new faces. And if UW gets to that first half of that Big Ten stretch and they have not met expectations, there's an easy off-ramp for Jedd Fisch to say, you know what, let's just ride the young guy and kind of see where this can take us, build for the future. And they had to do, it's a very different situation, but there's some similarities to what he had in Arizona and Jaden DeLora coming over from Wazoo. And then all of a sudden, you got a one-win team, continues to get better every year, 5 wins in year 2, 10-plus wins in year 3. UW, I can kind of see on that trajectory because of the rebuild that is taking place, that Damon Williams could be the guy halfway through the season that says, you know what, low-hanging fruit. Let's get this guy some run. I think he's got the ability to do it. Let's invest in our future.
I think the big thing that stands out with his situation is he is Jedd Fisch's guy, right? And you go back to the recruiting process when he was committed to Arizona. Everyone in that building, everyone in that department, it was, hey, are we going to get you guys going to get him into the All-American Bowl? And it worked out. We saw him inside the dome. He was electric both with his arm and his legs. And he follows that staff to Washington. And Cooper, you're right. I mean, there's a ton of transition, a ton of turnover there. They have to rebuild that roster. And why would you not ride with someone that has kind of been your guy from that 2024 cycle? That's the individual they identified. That's the recruiting battle they won. Remember, Ole Miss, Lane Kiffin were involved with Deondrae Williams, but no, Jedd Fisch, they won out. Then they get that kid to follow them to Seattle there at Washington. I fully expect Deondrae Williams to be involved in some type of role. I wouldn't be surprised if he emerged at some point and potentially started some games for them. The other thing that stands out about him, we're going to get to Dylan Raiola here at the top of your list. Deondrae Williams beat him twice as a senior when Dylan Raiola was there in Arizona. That's the one kind of like nugget I think people forget about. I mean, they went head to head, and he slayed the Dragon, the quarterback that was always ranked higher than him there when he was at Basha. So I think just based on reading the practice reports, what we've seen, they're going to need an influx of talent and an excitement, and it makes sense to kind of tab Deondrae Williams as the quarterback of the future.
I think the contrast in play style as well. Will Rogers and Deondrae Williams couldn't be really any different. Will Rogers, you got a statue kind of distributor from the pocket. Deondrae Williams, a guy who likes to move around, is kind of more of that point guard, likes to live in the perimeter. Had 1,100 yards rushing as a senior there in Basha. Drew, as you mentioned. I think about Jaden Daniels coming in the spot that he came into 2 years ago at LSU. It was a young, inexperienced offensive line. The legs are so important for a team. They just give you so much more optionality when you have a team that's going through a transition, especially an offensive line that's still trying to gel together. I think that's where UW is right now. Deondrae Williams, like I said, I think he makes a lot of sense for a team in transition, and you get to build for the future as well. All right, two names that we are very, very high on, and two names that we like a lot. Let's start with the number one quarterback in the country, DJ Lagway. Congrats to him. Gatorade commercial, that's pretty serious stuff. Florida Gators. He falls under the more likely than not. And Drew, in the article, when I was explaining why I think DJ Lagway has to play, one, he's just too gifted to keep off the field. Two, I think he's too important to Billy Napier. I think Billy Napier right now in a make or break year, he's got to showcase this guy. You got to show a little bit of the future. You got to show your hands, and this is the guy that you're tied to. Billy Napier's taken a lot of heat. The one thing that he's gotten right is DJ Lagway, and I feel so convicted, so confident in this young guy and what he's going to be and what he's going to mature to be. Andrew, you and I talk about all the time, we love ascending players. That's DJ Lagway since sophomore year has just done this, just kept climbing, and I think he's going to take his best ball to the SEC immediately. You think about it, his stature, 6'3", 225 pounds, multi-sport athlete, can get it done on the ground. I think the arm has come a long way. I think the decision-making has come a long way. And it's kind of funny. I mean, you think back to Florida and freshman quarterbacks, whether it was guys like Anthony Richardson, whether it was guys like Tim Tebow, Cam Newton. There's ways to get these guys incorporated, and you got a pretty good room and a pretty good comfort level in a guy like Graham Mertz, who started a lot of games in 43 games, a lot of experience. Graham Mertz was not the issue last year, but DJ Lagway can give you something different and can also give from 30,000 feet, this is important, the perception of that the future is in good hands, and that is really important for Billy Napier. Drew, I would not be surprised. We see this dude week one, Miami, ready to play. They're going to have to find a way to get him involved, and the fun thing about this is I wouldn't just limit him strictly to his legs. I'd find a way to get him involved in the passing game as well. I think that's the beauty of him and what he can do, but he's just too good to keep off the field. That's kind of the way I see it.
I thought the throws from the orange and blue game, he was further along than I kind of anticipated. And I know it's, you're going up against your own teammates, ones versus twos versus ones, and all that situation. I thought that was really encouraging. And you think back to, okay, Max Preps Player of the Year, Gatorade Player of the Year. He had as good a senior season as anyone in America. This is coming from people that have watched a ton of senior seasons. Coop, you're right. I mean, they got to find a way to get him in there. I think you hit it on the head. Important for the long-term outlook of the program. You know, the thing with DJ Lagway is Graham Mertz is pretty good. And I think Graham Mertz hasn't been talked about enough yet in that 2025 NFL draft. Our guy Jim Nagy at the Senior Bowl, he tweeted out, the early kind of player cards they had for them. Graham Mertz was there. But Florida's got to find a way to utilize him. And why not talk him up all preseason camp in advance of that Miami game? Because you're going to give Mario Cristobal and the Hurricanes something to prep for all August. Yeah, we got some packages for DJ Lagway. And you're right, it's not just DJ Lagway the runner, it's DJ Lagway the passer. So I think he is someone that they're going to have to get involved early because they're going to need him. And it's going to be exciting, I think, his freshman campaign.
I'm pumped up for that Florida-Miami game week 1. How many people you think are going to get the NCAA football game, the video game, and that's going to be the first game that they play? I mean, you got to be excited about that. You got the Gatorade Player of the Year, DJ Lagway, Cam Ward. It's going to be a fun one. All right, Drew, at number 1, Dylan Raiola, Nebraska, the 5-star, the number 7 player in all the country, the number 2 quarterback. This one just makes too much sense, right? We have him in the category of likely and may even start week 1. And let me tell you why. You look at Nebraska, 126 in passing offense last year. They also struggled to protect, 93rd in sacks given up. That's something that's a little bit worrisome. But Nebraska, 5 of their first 6 games are at home. That includes UTEP in Northern Iowa, not to mention Colorado, that had one of the worst passing defenses in all of college football. If you're Matt Rule, it's year 2. You just pulled off a major coup, beating out Ohio State, Georgia, USC for Dylan Raiola. Drew, the options there in that quarterback room, you got Heinrich Arberg. He started 8 games. He didn't eclipse over 200 yards passing last year once. You can only go up, right? And the thing that I talked about Julian Sayin coming into a really comfortable supporting cast, that's the biggest question mark in Nebraska. But what we saw out of Raiola, 6'3", 220 pounds, sturdy frame. Dad was an offensive lineman. He's got the pedigree, has a good feel for what it's going to look like. Played at Buford, one of the highest levels of competition in all of the country in Georgia. 34 touchdowns, 1 INT, took care of the football, super efficient. That's what you have to ask him to do. You have to have a steady dose of the running game, really good balance. I think they can do that. I think they can establish that. Whether or not he starts game 1, I don't know. Whether or not this guy's going to be a part of Nebraska's current outlook here under Matt Rule. Yes, I think immediately. I think he's going to be part of the plan. So a lot to like about Dylan Raiola, Drew, from a physical standpoint. He's ready to go, like just physically, arm talent, everything else. He checks all those boxes. It's the decision making, all those things, understanding the speed of the game, adjusting to the speed of the game that will come. And conversely, to the other guys that we've talked about, Nebraska's in a situation to grow and take their lumps with Dylan Raiola. So I think they have to have a plan. They have to have a vision, which they will have for Dylan Raiola. They have to continue to protect and build his confidence. But if they do that, there's no reason in my eyes why you can't start Dylan Raiola week 1.
16 of 22, 239 yards in that spring game. Another one where you watch all the throws from it, and you're like, okay, he's a little bit further along than we thought. Coop, they have to play him. And I've said this from the jump. As soon as he flipped from Georgia right before the Nebraska football moving forward, it's going to start with Dylan Raiola because he is the biggest quarterback recruit in the modern era for them. I mean, I haven't had the opportunity to dig back in the archives and look to see what they did back in the 70s and 80s, but this is the guy, right? Everyone that tunes in knows it is Dylan Raiola. The pressure is that they have to play him. They have to play him for a variety of different reasons, and he can get the ball to the targets. I mean, we love what he does in terms of stretching it down the field. Go back again to what we saw at Buford, what we saw from him as a youngster, what we saw at the Elite 11 finals. I mean, you think about Malachi Coleman streaking down the sideline, that's 6 points right there. So, yeah, I mean, he's the one where it makes sense. And let me ask you this, right? With DJ Lagway, with Dylan Raiola, given where we are with the transfer portal, NIL, doesn't it seem like some of these big names, you have to play them, right? You're in a situation where you kind of got, if we can compare this to the NFL draft, right? They are first-round picks. How long can you wait until they're ready to go?
I agree. The funny thing about this is doing research for this article, the top 10 quarterbacks last year, half of those guys have already transferred. And they're guys like Dante Moore, who started 5 games, played in 9 games. You look at other guys like Jaden Rashada, started 2 games, played in 3 games. Aiden Childs, who transferred, played in 9 games. Obviously, a lot of this is circumstantial with a couple of these situations. Chip Kelly, UCLA, even though that happened before he left with Dante Moore. Rashada, obviously, I think that one's been very publicly documented. Austin Mack, another one of those guys as well. So, yeah, Drew, you would think traditionally that playing time would keep those guys there. Nowadays, I just think it's a crapshoot. The guys that have stayed in the top 10, Arch Manning, Nico Iamaleava, Jackson Arnold, Avery Johnson, Christopher Vizina going to sit at Clemson, Kineholz, we mentioned, Kenny Minchie, Ricky Collins, right? So, I don't know. You think that there's some predictive type of way that you can try to get a good indication whether these guys are leaning in, leaning out, but it's the 2 most day one ready guys last year were Dante Moore, Jackson Arnold, Jaden Rashada. You could throw in that conversation, and 2 out of 3 of those guys already have new homes. It's kind of hard to wrap your head around. You're kind of looking for some pattern. I don't know if there is one. That's kind of the outcome that I arrived at.
Okay, well, how many of this 5 starts a bowl game?
Of the 5 that we talked about?
All of them, right?
Oh, of these 5 right here in 2024?
Yeah.
I would say Raiola. The hard part about this is that if you consider, all right, where is Florida going to be? Are they going to be in CFP contention? If Graham Mertz is what we think he is from an NFL draft standpoint, is Graham Mertz going to play in a postseason game? Probably not, right? So that would be one to bet on. Dylan Raiola would probably be bet on. Damon Williams would probably be bet on. Ohio State and Auburn are going to be situational. If the line was 2.5, I would take 3. I know we love these prop bets, but I would go with 3 there. I feel pretty confident about that, and it's more circumstantial, really, at the end of the day. Who's the one guy out of that group that you're like, can't wait to see this guy freshman year?
I think Lagway. I think it's just Lagway, and because I think we'll see it opening weekend. He'd be one, and then I think Damon Williams is going to be fun at Washington. Coop, I wanted to ask you this: who was on the fringe for this list? Because I wrote down some names. Like, who are some other true freshmen? And I was having this conversation with a group of 5 staffer actually over the weekend, right? Because I kind of went through the 130 quarterback situations. I don't know who wrote up the article and who's the expected starter. It doesn't seem like at the G5 level there's really any true freshmen that are going to break through and start. And that feels like, I don't know, such a difference than maybe 5-10 years ago. And it makes sense, right? You're coaching for your job. You can go get a veteran in the transfer portal. Why would you try to throw a freshman out there? So who else is on the short list for you that failed to make the cut in this top 5?
This came from our boy Hudson Stanish. Shout out Hudson Stanish, does a phenomenal job. Make sure you follow him. He brought up Timothy Carpenter, who's now at Tulsa, Drew, who you were a huge fan of, originally signed with Indiana, transferred to Tulsa. He said there's some buzz around him. That was the one group of 5 name. The other one was Jaden Davis, which is ironic and not ironic in so many different ways, because he was such I don't want to say a point of contention, but a name that we thoroughly debated throughout the rankings process and the evaluation process. I don't know about Michigan's quarterback room. I don't know what to expect out of Orgy. I don't know what that looks like. Jaden Davis is a young, very mature signal caller, like the game within the game. He's got a very good feel for, and I love what he's put on tape over the last 2 years. You can argue balls and strikes when it comes to upside as it relates to the NFL, but in terms of the collegiate game and a guy that's very cerebral and knows how to stay ahead of the sticks, Jaden Davis kind of stuck out to me.
That's the one I had marked down. I've heard good things about him, and I think him participating in CFP bowl practices and him being around J.J. McCarthy and those other guys, it was kind of a moment where it's like, all right, I do belong here. So I think he's someone you could win with, given what Michigan wants to do. That's why I put him in the category. 2 others I wrote down here, because it's not easy. Like, there is no I think you did an excellent job of assembling this five. C.J. Bailey at NC State, right? They got Grayson McCall. I think he might have secured the number 2 role, so he'd be more out of necessity, injury. He gets in the field, but he had a long run in his spring game. You think about his senior season, came up big in some key moments for that Chaminade Madonna prep team that had Jeremiah Smith and JoJo Trader. Got better every single year, tons of experience under his belt. And the other one I wrote down, Coop, Elijah Brown at Stanford, coming over from Mater Dei, kind of the same situation. Stanford has had a ton of different quarterbacks there. Ashton Daniels, I think, is the projected starter. I think he's got a higher floor in terms of what he can maybe bring you early on there at Stanford.
I like Elijah Brown. I like the way he fits. The other one you and I have talked about a lot, and credit to NC State, is C.J. Bailey, who just seems to be a guy more than likely will probably need a year. But you think about what NC State's done at the receiver position via the transfer portal, guys like Noah Rogers. You bring in Terrell Anderson from the high school ranks. A lot to be excited about. Then you plug that dude in. The outlook 2 to 3 years from now at NC State is very, very positive. Guys, we appreciate you locking in with us at 24/7 Sports. And you want all the recruiting intel, everything that you need from a scouting standpoint as well, make sure to visit 247sports.com. Also, make sure to subscribe as well. There you see it, wall-to-wall team coverage, recruiting rankings, transfer portal updates as well. All right, Drew, now time for the Transaction Wire this Tuesday. And our guy, who better to start with than SMU commit, top 247 quarterback Kayin Russell. It's been a merry-go-round, even though he's been committed to the Ponies for quite some time. Alabama, Texas, Oregon, you name it, they've all been sniffing around. He just had an OV to Alabama. He's got OVs coming up to Florida, in Oregon, in June. Drew, the crystal ball has been shifted to Alabama's favor. Kalen DeBoer, the crew, Nick Sheridan over there doing a phenomenal job. Let's just talk about it hypothetically, right? What do you think about that potential fit of Kayin Russell playing in a Kalen DeBoer offense?
Love it. He's one of the most efficient passers in the 2025 class, just below 70% over the past 2 years for a Duncanville program that has won a ton of games. I think he can handle a high volume of passes. I think he navigates the pocket well. I'm not saying he's Michael Penix, but I think there are some similarities in terms of how they move around back there. So I think that potential marriage, that potential fit, I love it. And I'm interested to see what happens with the Crimson Tide. I had to write something last week, kind of my top storylines heading into the first real official visit weekend. No one's really talking about what's the long-term plan there in Tuscaloosa at quarterback. Kalen DeBoer, this new look staff, they have yet to sign a high schooler. I know they got Jalen Milroe there. I know Austin Mack, he comes over with DeBoer from Washington. He should be viewed as the quarterback of the future. But, 2-3 years down the line, who is the guy? And Kayin Russell's the one to me where I get pretty excited about what that could look like in that offensive system.
You get excited about the potential, right? Austin Mack was a guy that we talked about potentially as a top 32 prospect. If he didn't reclass, he jumps up 2 years ago, ends up being a top 100 guy, transfers from Washington to Tuscaloosa with Kalen DeBoer. If they're able to reel in a guy like Kayin Russell, who, Drew, we have just raved about this kid between the ears, what he brings, his championship pedigree from Duncanville High School, is a good fit. I mean, and listen, I think if you're Alabama, you go into that situation, Kalen DeBoer, you're a little bit behind the 8 ball in terms of high school recruiting. You look at the board. I mean, shoot, man, they kicked the tires on just about everybody. When you think about it, Julian Lewis, Deuce Knight, committed to Notre Dame. And I think if they're able to pull this off, this is a best-case scenario in terms of what Alabama could have gotten done this cycle at the quarterback position. So we'll see what happens. I don't think SMU is going down without a fight. I think they've showed that. They've hung in and they've hung around this long for a reason. We'll see. SMU is serious. They just bought their way into the ACC and Power 4 football. I don't think they're going to let a top 40 prospect go. This is the first time in a long time that they've been within reach of one of these type of dudes. I expect to fight white-knuckle battle all the way through. Next guy, Julian Lewis, 5-star, number 16 player in the country, number 3 quarterback in the country. He just got done a visit with Indiana. He's got some ties there. Tom Lewis mentioned that. Make sure to check that out on 247sports.com. He's got OVs to USC, Auburn, Colorado. I talked to Tom Lloyd this morning. just trying to get a feel for this one. Drew, it feels open. I think you and I have thought that for quite some time, even though he's committed to USC. It almost feels kind of like a soft verbal at this time if you're kind of reading between the lines. How serious of a threat is Indiana? I don't know, but it seems like Auburn's kind of the team to kind of watch here, regardless of what's going on in a four-horse race right now. Drew, I mean, Curt Cignetti, Indiana, you know, you and I kind of talked about this when we talked about Dylan Raiola. You know, I used to say, I always thought Dylan Raiola was going to end up in Nebraska. That didn't necessarily mean that I thought he was going to sign with him out of high school. But Julian Lewis, just the feel that I have for this, the recruitment, the way that it's going, and I think the response to this is like this is the modern recruitment. I get that. I wouldn't be shocked if Julian Lewis finds a second home during his college career. I wish him the best. But that would also be typical. More than 50% of FBS quarterbacks are now transfers. This Indiana visit for Indiana, if they don't get him the first time, Drew, I kind of got my eyes on this. I'm kind of like, all right, this is good work here by Curt Cignetti.
3D chess.
3D chess. Yes, I love it.
Recruiting for the second visit. I think Cignetti, I mean, you look at the recruiting class, ranked 29th right now. That's good enough for 8th in the new look Big Ten. I kind of like what they got going on. And Tom Allen did a great job of getting some talent there to Bloomington. They've lost some through the transfer portal over the years, but Byron Baldwin, top 2-4 safety out of Maryland, we love him. They just got Jalen Bell over the weekend, Chris McCorkle, another guy with some tools, Joe Anthony Hall, our number 8 wide receiver. He's scheduled to take an official visit to Indiana in a few weeks. A while ago, I didn't think like the Indiana Julian Lewis stuff was serious, and now after this visit, I'm kind of sitting around again like, okay, I can maybe talk myself into it a little bit. I think Colorado's a team you got to watch out for. Auburn, certainly interesting, given what Hugh Freeze has done, how some of those high-profile battles have gone in recent months and really in recent cycles. So I don't know, Coop. Am I wrong here? Like the Elite 11 finals feels like from a recruiting juice scoop perspective, it's got the most buzz it's had in a very, very long time. We just talked about Kayin Russell, committed to SMU. He's taken visits. You got Julian Lewis, committed to USC. He's taken some visits. It seems like there's a ton of kind of dominoes and pivoting and adjustments that could happen. What happens with KJ Lacey, potentially if someone were to turn to him, Deuce Knight, crystal ball picking for Ole Miss. He's committed to Notre Dame. He's been linked to Alabama in the past. It just feels like there's more potential movement than ever as we sit 2 weeks away from the Elite 11 finals.
It's been funny to kind of to watch it play out. You look at Kayin Russell, and for a while, I thought Texas was going to be the team that emerged. They kind of did their due diligence. Then it was Alabama that's emerged. We'll see what happens. A lot of teams still involved there. A lot of big players, right? I mean, you got Alabama, Oregon, Florida. These are teams that we've seen are willing to dole out whatever it takes to get their guy, especially at the quarterback position. KJ Lacey's the interesting one. He's kind of the guy you float back to, and you're like, all right, well, if Julian Lewis went to Auburn, KJ Lacey probably sticks at Texas. We'll talk about what Texas could be doing in 2026 and what their quarterback room looks like. So, yes, a lot to play out. Julian Lewis, we'll see what happens. If Julian Lewis doesn't end up at USC, what does USC do? Is there any kind of, pivot that kind of makes sense? I know we've talked about Husson Longstreet in the past, but it seems like he's pretty squared away with Texas A&M. Is there anyone that just kind of makes sense to you?
Man, that's got my mind sure. Because Lincoln Riley only hands out a select number of quarterback offers. I don't know if I have an immediate answer. I mean, they would have to go after someone else that's committed to another school. I mean, sticking with the theme, right, of the Elite 11 finals, Malik Washington, uncommitted. Camario Taylor just takes an official visit to UCF, the Mississippi State commit. Bryce Baker, another guy that's been linked to Alabama, the North Carolina commit. What if he, Kayin Russell says no to the Crimson Tide? Is that the guy that they pivot to? I mean, there's just a ton of potential kind of jockeying out there, I think, when it comes to these quarterbacks.
All right, let's talk about one of my favorite, most interesting recruitment so far at the quarterback position. Our guy, Antoine Hill. He's just coming off an OV to Florida, the number 12 quarterback in the country. He's got a visit to Memphis next, and it looks like Florida and Memphis coming down the line July 13th. And it seems that Florida kind of cooled off, and then they've kind of come back around on him and kind of turned it up as the chips have fallen. And now Memphis will get their shot at him. Drew, he just dropped his visit that Memphis sent him for the OV. The first thing you see is a FedEx plane taking off, which I love. Obviously, FedEx involved with Memphis just gave $25 million in NIL funds. Obviously, we know how this game works nowadays, but I think you and I a couple weeks ago both kind of made our case for Florida and for Memphis. I kind of like the Memphis situation. I also like the continuity of what Florida's trying to do in their quarterback room. DJ Lagway and Antoine Hill, physically, how these guys look from a stature standpoint are pretty similar. DJ Lagway, a lot better athlete, going to give you a lot more on the ground. But this is a guy in a healthy quarterback room that you could put on ice for 2 to 3 years. There's going to be a ton of intrigue. That being said, Antoine Hill could go to Memphis, and he could go to Florida, and he could find his way back to Memphis or somewhere like Memphis. So that's where I'm kind of fascinated by this. I think both these schools have a completely different pitch in terms of what they can offer. And this won't be an exact dollar-to-dollar type of recruitment. There's some other things kind of playing out here that I find are pretty fascinating when you look into the Antoine Hill recruitment.
He could go to Memphis and then back to Florida. You didn't even throw out, we highlighted
That's
him
true.
as a potential, transfer up candidate. I would like it for Florida. I know we're going to talk about their 2026 quarterback commit here in a second, but I think he is someone that has a ton of experience there at Houston County, needs to improve the ball placement, especially at that intermediate level, but he can air it out like few others in the class. And then Billy Napier getting his hands on Antoine Hill. We talked about DJ Lagway, right? Why did DJ Lagway take such a huge developmental step forward between his junior and senior seasons? At a coach's clinic, Billy Napier was talking. He said that DJ Lagway and the Florida coaching staff, Billy Napier, Ryan O'Hara, all those guys, were doing weekly Zoom calls and film study sessions with DJ Lagway throughout his entire senior season and the months leading up to it. And I think that's one of the big reasons why DJ Lagway improved so much in that 12th grade season at Willis, led them very far. It was a historical season for them. And then you apply that, okay, what Billy Napier and that staff has done with Graham Mertz, think about Antoine Hill. I think they're a program that could get the most out of Antoine Hill. And it's certainly fascinating in the sense of like FedEx money, player development, which direction does this recruitment go?
Money is money, man. Like, I love the group of five, blue blood, Florida. Right now, you're kind of seeing that play out in new age college football. So we'll see what happens with Antoine Hill. Drew, we're already almost 45 minutes into the show. So we're going to turn this into a little bit of a up-tempo segment here. 2026 quarterbacks are starting to come off the board, and Noah Grubbs committed to Notre Dame yesterday, number 165 in the top 247, number 11 quarterback. Will Griffin comes off the board from Florida. Faison Brandon, well, he camps at Tennessee, the number 1 player in 2026. A lot of buzz there. And then Dia Bell, a lot of buzz to Texas as well. So, Drew, out of those 4 guys, I guess we can start with the 2 that have committed. What kind of catches your eye of this group?
That the 2026 quarterback dominoes are falling, man. You just said Kayla DeBoer is behind the 8 ball at Alabama in terms of they weren't able to sink their teeth in on those 25 quarterbacks. Like the 2026, it's a race to get to these spots. And Noah Grubbs, he beats out Brady Hart and secures his spot at Notre Dame. Brady Hart has been linked to Florida. They get a pledge from Will Griffin, who I love the potential idea of Florida going DJ Lagway, Antoine Hill, Will Griffin. Will Griffin, to me, he has started more games than any quarterback in this 2026 cycle that we've come across so far. Yes, there could be some guys that potentially emerge at some point down the line, but he physically looks the part. 6'3", 225 pounds, 10.5-inch hands. Kind of reminds me of Sean Clifford in terms of the durability, what he's able to do with his arms. He's someone that you could label as a dual threat talent, but he's going to try to pick you apart from the pocket. So I like that pickup for Florida. They had a ton of options, right? All these guys were linked to the Gators. Brady Hart has a ton of ties to the Gators. Will Griffin, he's got a Florida license plate on his car. Saw him at one of the camps there. That was kind of a low-key battle. So I want to know what's going to happen with Brady Hart. Now that he's back on the market, is it LSU? Is it Michigan? That stands out. Noah Grubbs to Notre Dame. Love the tools on him. He has lit up some bad defenses in Central Florida, and he's held his own against some good defenses. I think he throws it loose. He's 6'4". Notre Dame, what they've done at that quarterback position. Coop, I know you haven't dug into him yet, but I think you're going to like him. Just to me, he has to improve a little bit as a full field reader. And then those top two you brought up, Faison Brandon, camping at Tennessee. I'm getting the early, reading the tea leaves that the Vols are going to be the team to beat in that recruitment. I think they've done an excellent job. I think he fits that system, what they want to do. And then Diabell, he was at Penn State, he was at Georgia. It sounds like Texas with him. I mean, Sark doesn't get enough credit for that kind of first quarterback camp he does every summer. He gets all the top guys out there, and it seems like Diabell might be the one that has the spot in Austin.
In your mind, who do you think the best quarterback recruiter is in college football? And the reason I bring this up, because I think a year or two ago, you probably say that was Lincoln Riley, right? And I think at this point he deserves credit and should be that guy. But you look at USC's quarterback room right now, Miller Moss, Jaden Maeva, Julian Lewis, wait and see. That talent compared to what's been there, it's not the same. It's not comparable. And then you look at what Sarkisian has been able to do with guys like Quinn Ewers, Arch Manning, people might balk at it, but Sam Ehlinger before that, right? So it's pretty interesting to kind of see who's that guy. And then, listen, Hendon Hooker, right? You go with the year of Joe Milton. Now you got Nico. I think Nico's special. Merklinger after that. I think if you bring in a guy like Faison Brandon, that's a good situation. Obviously, he's top of our board for a reason. But I love the idea of Faison Brandon and Tennessee's offense. And the other one, Drew, I love this one. I love Diabell at Texas. And the other thing about this, talk about the family roots, the trees, all that type of stuff. Raja Bell's son and Diabell. This guy's a puppy, even in the face, just a baby. Long way to go there, but he can spin it at American Heritage in Florida. So there you go, 2026, starting to get going. And the last thing I'll say, Drew, you brought up Notre Dame, 110% right there. You got to give Marcus Freeman so much credit with what they've done. Riley Leonard, Kenny Minchie, Stephen Jelly, C.J. Carr, Noah Grubbs, Deuce Knight in 2025. I mean, you talk about giving yourself some options, especially with a lot of developmental upside. Notre Dame deserves a ton of credit because from when Brian Kelly was there to Marcus Freeman's there, they completely changed the tune in the perception of their quarterback room. All right, Drew, a couple other guys. Yeah, go ahead.
You can tell what programs have their quarterback recruiting involved, right? It's the ones that are hosting the top 2026 quarterbacks right now. They are thinking not just 1 year, they are thinking 2, 3, 4 years down the line. And I think they deserve recognition for that. It's the schools we just mentioned. Notre Dame's doing it. Florida's doing it. Texas, you want to talk about a quarterback recruiter? How about AJ Milwee? The guys that he has identified throughout the recruiting process, some of these schools, they just seem to be so short-sighted, whereas others, they're getting 6, 7 rising juniors and they're establishing that relationship. We talk about it all the time. Quarterback recruiting is so accelerated. You don't want to be behind the 8 ball. Sure, yes, in some situations you can flip someone, you can find the guy, you can strike gold, but that's a difficult practice to do. And I think it's better to be proactive rather than reactive. And some schools are clearly more proactive at the moment.
It's this is a little dramatic, but it is kind of like a delicate kind of art form in terms of how you're juggling these guys, 25, 26, 27. Also, from the psychological standpoint of, all right, this is what it's going to look like for you. This is what it's going to look like for you. The Quinn Ewers, balancing an Arch Manning of hey, I think there was probably a very realistic outlook of Quinn Ewers going to the NFL draft after this year if you would have told him that Texas was going to make the CFP, but because of injuries, that's a little bit of a different outlook. Now he's got to sit another year, which I think ultimately is a good thing. So I think balancing all those things, you got to have some foresight. We've seen that from teams like Texas, like USC, like Florida as well, doing some really good things. Drew, a couple names coming off in 2025, Louisville, Ole Miss, Wisconsin. I like when we get into the nitty-gritty of these type of teams because these are the guys doing some real scouting here. LeBron Hill, number 116 receiver in the country out of Indiana. He commits to Louisville. Jeff Brom. You like this dude. I turned on the tape. I like this dude. Tell me why you like this guy.
Yeah, we got called out last week. We only talked about the top guys on the board. Well, here is a commit I like going to Louisville. LeBron Hill, saw him at the OT7 Orlando event a couple months ago. Basketball-focused athlete that has realized, hey, I'm probably not going to play in the NBA, even though I could play in college. So I'm going to try to make the NFL. He's a big perimeter target. Talking with some of the guys around his 7-on-7 organization, Gus Ramos, the boom guys out of the Midwest, they said this kid really couldn't catch the football not too long ago. I said, are you sure? Because it was acrobatic grab after acrobatic grab against some really good defensive backs. Louisville, they have lived and swam in the transfer portal, but if they're going to go to the high school ranks, I love this type of pickup for them in LeBron Hill. Physically ready to go. I think he can be an X on the outside. Really the first big win for them from this recruiting weekend. And I think he's someone that can make a difference in that offense. Think about the play caller, how they move guys around, scheme up targets. LeBron Hill, I think he's going to be a name to know in the ACC.
He's one of those dudes, we got next gen, we got that stock up kind of icon there, Drew. That's one of those guys I'm really looking forward to watching as a senior. Two other guys, quote unquote, in your backyard in the state of Florida. Keon Young, Rakeem Stroud as well. Keon Young, top 247 safety. He commits to Ole Miss, Drew. And another guy, you buzz again this morning, you remind yourself why you like him. He's just always around the football. Love the ball production, love the versatility, really like him in the deep third of the field. He's a fun one, man. And every time we look at Ole Miss is just continuing to kind of get more and more acclimated with pulling these caliber of players, especially on defense, which we have not seen from them routinely over the years. If Ole Miss is going to change the tune of going from an SEC contender to a national championship contender, this is going to be how they're going to do it, guys like Keon Young.
Another program that's as active as anyone in the transfer portal, but they're still, building a little bit through the draft, and I think they're doing it better than they have in the past under Lane Kiffin. Keon Young, former USF commit, he was linked to Florida, was linked to Kentucky. I like this pickup for the Rebels, and they're sitting 26th in the rankings right now. Lane has some offensive firepower, right? Jerome Miles, the 5-star wide receiver, A.K. Deere, the running back. Like, those are two guys that are going to help you score a lot of points. But I like this defensive class. Starts with Keon Young, ball hawk of a safety, 9 interceptions the past 2 seasons. He's comfortable near the line. Speed isn't there, but he can hang. Someone that has done it in Polk County. I think it's an under-the-radar pickup. And then Talib Graham, the edge rusher they got committed, buzzed his spring game, was watching someone else, and my eyes kept going back to Talib Graham. So I just think Ole Miss, how they're constructing the roster, it's starting to make more and more sense, and I think it's going to be built for some long-term success. And you think about the season they could potentially have, it's going to be easier to get more of these high-profile guys in the boat.
All right, now my favorite team to talk about. I love talking about Wisconsin because I love what they do from a talent ID standpoint. Shout out to Luke Fickell, their staff. They do an unbelievable job. But this kid, Rakeem Stroud, Drew, they kind of take guys like this and they make a living off of these guys. And what I mean by that, yeah, maybe a little bit undersized, maybe a little bit narrow, maybe needs to put on some weight. But 2 times under 11 seconds in the 100-meter dash. He can roll, reactionary guy, cat quick, plays bigger than his size. He's really willing tackler. This is a smooth kid, Drew, that I love the man-to-man ability. I can see him kind of going inside as well. I like the versatility. This dude's going to Wisconsin, and this will be one, I think, in like 3 years we look back and we're like, hey, where'd they get this guy from? And it was kind of right under everybody's nose.
Yeah, our number 40 cornerback, and I wish we could just push him higher in the rankings because I know Gabe Brooks on the scouting team, he's a big fan of Rakeem Stroud. Like, the tape pops. I mean, this guy is competitive. The only issue is you said he's a little narrow, he's a little light. I think that's an understatement. Under 140 pounds. I think that has scared a ton of schools off. But if you're Wisconsin in this current landscape of college football player movement, hey, bring him in, see where you can get in 2 years, because he's comfortable in man coverage. He can maintain phase. It's easy to kind of turn over the roster. So I love the Badgers rolling the dice here. I think Paul Haynes, one of their defensive back coaches, is an excellent recruiter. Love the vision he has. He got an absolute steal last cycle in Xavier Lucas out of Fort Lauderdale American Heritage, just ripped off like a 10.5 to cap off his high school career in the 100-meter dash. I think he's a guy that we're going to regret not having in the top 247. They also add Emilio Agard, who was great at the All-American Bowl, Jay Harper. I just like what they're doing in the secondary. And Raheem Stroud, it's kind of one of those ones where, the weight, how narrow he is, but you can see the long-term vision. And Coop, how about this? They also got a crystal ball pick from Mason Posa recently, decorated wrestler, Luke Fickell, just going after guys that get it done on the mat.
I mean, Mason Posa was, I said this about Zayden Walker the other day in what school kind of fit him. Mason Posa, if there was a fit that just made sense, it would be to play for Luke Fickell in Madison, Wisconsin. You talked about the wrestling background, the pedigree there. I love that. Highly versatile, highly instinctive, and a violent linebacker is how you would best describe Mason Posa. Guys, I talk about it all the time. Tuesday and Wednesday, you can find the Oyster Boys right here on the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. What about Monday? What about Thursday? On Thursday, you can find 24/7 Sports Live. Our guys, Carl Reed, Smoke Dixon, Emily Proud, Blair and Gulo. We got a nice little rotation, nice little Rolodex here at 24/7 Sports. Some of the best in the industry. Make sure to check them out every Thursday, 5 o'clock Eastern time on the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. And without further ado, Drew, time for some questions. And what I can tell you right now, Drew, and I think this has become the routine and what to expect, pull up that next gen board, have your notes ready, be able to search some of these players because we got some good questions. But Drew, I like this one because you and I have had a lot of deliberate conversations over the weekend. On Monday, been talking about this a lot, but Canes Cats, shout out Canes Cats, always here with us. He says, question A, Andrew and Cooper. And Drew, I kind of want you to answer this one. Can you give the fans and myself an insight on the day in the life of a scout like yourself? And Drew, you have a unique perspective because you do a lot of different things. You write articles, you do this podcast, you rank players, you deal with publishers, you deal with a lot of different things. So take us through, I would say, a regular Monday, which is probably one of the busier days in the week for you.
Well, I mean, we're in commit season, right? So Monday morning, you're getting up, checking to see who has committed over the weekend, right? So I think we had like 35 FBS commitments from Saturday to roughly noon on Monday, going through, making sure we're graded on those guys, tweaking the profiles, updating the profiles. And then right now for me, what I'm kind of in is I'm in Elite 11 prep, being as versed as possible as I can in those quarterbacks. And I know it's 2 weeks out, but I'm watching a full game on those guys. I'm digging in, trying to find, ridiculous stats and facts on these individuals because it's going to enhance our coverage when we're out there in the Elite 11 finals. I'm talking with college staffers, I'm talking with publishers, trying to find information on guys that, are camping in certain places. And then I'm communicating with a lot of people at 24/7 Sports, Tom Loy, Cooper Petagna. My days start pretty early and they go pretty late, depending on the time of the year. Coop, is that a good enough answer? Or
that's a great answer. The other thing that I will say is there's a lot of things that are boiled into the rankings process, and I think a lot of people look at Andrew and probably say, all right, he's the director of scouting. Well, with that comes a lot of responsibility, and not only in the present that you want to make sure you get right, but you also want to make sure that you're adjusting for the future as well. Our job is also to be innovative, to be the best in the space, continue to try to find ways to stay and meet the standard that we have for ourselves. And I think part of that job is looking at ways that we can improve. And a lot of that is dealing with sometimes people outside of the company that we can find a way to incorporate, work with, that will bring information, convey information in a way that makes sense to you, the audience, the consumer. When you're looking at a player, you're trying to differentiate. All right, well, why does Andrew like this player? Why does Cooper like this player? Why does Brandon Huffman see this player X against player Y differently? If there's different ways that we can explain that, through the lens of what we value: multi-sport, genes, speed, explosiveness scores, track and field data, production, projection, body types, all those type of things. All the work that we're doing behind the scenes, I think we're trying to figure out better ways to illuminate those things and bring it forward facing. So yes, we have a responsibility to the rankings and to the current process, but we also have a responsibility to the future as well, and try to make 24/7 sports better than it is today. And a lot of that is Andrew's job. So he deals with a broad range of different topics, and he's got a lot of bandwidth, more than a lot of other people. So we're fortunate to have him. A lot of different hats that he has to wear, much like anybody who's watching this show. I'm sure at most people's job, you got to wear a lot of different hats to do the job. It's not just the one thing that I think a lot of people think that you're assigned to do. So that's kind of what it looks like. Kane's Cats, you got a follow-up, more of a football question. Question to Andrew and Coop: give us a prediction on which quarterback you think will be the biggest riser at the Elite 11, and will position players also be in attendance? If so, who? Second part of that question, Drew, I believe is a no, right?
I know Brian Stump was watching the show, who does an excellent job of organizing the Elite 11 finals. I know he's watching it earlier when we were talking quarterbacks. My understanding, there's not going to be as many big-time national skill talent out at the Elite 11 finals this year. I think we're going to lean locally on high schools when it comes to 7-on-7. They kind of like adjusted. I mean, remember last year, if you were a quarterback that played 7-on-7 later in the day, you were kind of at a disadvantage because some of the big names had shut it down, like our guy, Luke Reynolds. So I don't think there's going to be a ton of talent out there. I think really the big off-season event that you're going to get a ton of national names out is this weekend, the OT7 finals. It seems like a lot of 2025s are going to participate in that. I know some guys are on visits, but that might be the closest thing we get to like a previous open type of setting in previous years. And yeah, there's going to be some college camps mixed in here and there, some elite college camps. We've already seen some here and there, but man, the rising seniors really, really aren't kind of like working out from what I've seen just from like week one. It's more 2026s, 2027s, and you talk with college staffers, like that is where the focus is. So that was a long answer to a short question. Coop, biggest riser you think in the quarterbacks?
I think you can go a lot of different directions. I'm going to go with Kamario Taylor. I like Kamario Taylor. I like the profile. 6'3 plus, 210 pounds lean. I think you and I have talked about the fit. It's interesting. Just took an OV to UCF, correct? So Gus Malzahn kind of sniffing around a little bit. I think he's had success with those type of quarterbacks. We'll see what happens with him. Matt Zoller certainly comes to mind a little bit, a guy that we've been high on and kind of moved up the board here recently. Drew, I think one guy that I'm excited to see, where I'm like, you and I coming together and maybe coming out and saying, all right, you have this vantage point on him, I don't have this vantage point on him. When we come out of this week, let's kind of see where we're at. I'm interested to see Ryan Montgomery in Georgia. It's just one of those guys I think I see more high floor. I think when you saw him live, you said, hey, this guy's got a little bit more juice than I initially thought. So I'm interested to see the Georgia commit, Ryan Montgomery, and kind of see kind of how he fits into some of these arms. And then the last one, Deuce Knight's had an excellent offseason for Notre Dame. So I'm excited to see Deuce Knight, kind of how he stacks up against these guys. And can he put 2 days together? It's a 3-day event, but can he put 2 solid days together? I think that will say a lot.
So I think there's like 15 of our 20 are inside of the 20 invited are inside the top 247. So 3 names that jump out to me are, I just want to see how they stack up with the guys that are the inside. Bryce Baker committed to North Carolina, Tramel Jones at Florida State, and I think Luke Nickel at Miami. I think all 3 of those guys, are going to be entering. All right, let's see how they match up with some of their peers. I'm trying to think who can you compare them to from the 2023 Elite 11 finals? Like, who's the guy that shot up the board?
In terms of which guys are you talking about specifically? Remind me.
Like 3 stars that ended up as 4 stars.
Yeah, I think in the past, right? I don't even know if I was at this one, but guys like Jackson Smolik, right, who kind of worked up the board. One once committed to Tulane, went to Penn State. Gronkmeyer was a guy that, ironically enough, another Penn State guy that had kind of caught the wind behind him. Kalen, we bumped up. I think additional context on guys like Will Hammond was really important as well. Same with Deondrae Williams. There's so much that you get from seeing these guys just around each other, what they look like from a body type standpoint, physical stature, release, how these guys are kind of acclimating to the strenuous, different individual periods that the Elite 11 coaching staff is kind of putting them through. All that stuff is super interesting. And quite honestly, I think the guy last year that we expected to kind of be a cut above everybody else and was good, but maybe not what we thought, was kind of C.J. Carr. So it goes both ways. Guys move in different directions, but at the same time, we always come back to it. I mean, you got to be really, really careful about how you kind of weigh these events. Really, ultimately, at the end of the day, we'll take the bulk of what we see off of the field, the way these guys are trending. How do they take what they've done throughout the offseason? How does that apply to their senior season? And which way is the arrow going? Are these guys moving up the board? Are they moving down the board? Are they plateauing? Not so much as how we see it in their stock, but just in terms of their physical trajectory, their grasp of the game. There's certain things that are tangible. You saw it with DJ Lagway, the completion percentage, TD to INT. All those things got better year over year. So it's the year over year progress. And especially coming out of that event, it just gives us a lot of color how these guys are really trending. All right.
I think Ethan Gronkmeyer, I think, was the biggest riser.
Last one, Drew. Andrew Mormon asks, he says, question for Andrew and Coop, are Elite 11 West Coast defensive line edge players ever going to be the same caliber as Southeastern elite prospects, Breland rushing, Mateo Uaongalale versus what I assume is Elijah Griffin and Jakeem Stewart here? That's a good question. I don't think it's the quality is certainly comparable. It's the quantity. It's more of a numbers game when you're comparing West Coast versus the Southeast. You're just going to find more bigger bodies in that region across the board than you're going to find on the West Coast, and that's the way that it was in Washington. That's the way that it is when I was at Oregon. That's the way that it is for Dan Lanning. That's the way that it is for Jed Fish. And what made Oregon's defensive line haul so impressive last year, if you can wrap your arms around a really talented crop on the defensive line on the West Coast and keep that away from everybody else, now that you're in the Big Ten, you got USC, UCLA, Washington that you have to compete with, that makes their job extremely difficult. They got to find other avenues to go get that beef. And the reason I say that is we've seen what the portal market has been like for defensive linemen. It is a over-exasperated market for a lot of these teams to be able to live there. And you look at teams like LSU who are aligned from an NIL standpoint, but it was kind of a reality check for them to go in the portal. Guys like Dominic Williams that, you think with a guy like Bo Davis and the player development record that they have, that they'd be able to go get a guy like that. And they weren't, right? So for Oregon, and I've thought this is now my belief, but Oregon, any other team, if you have an opportunity to get what I like to call premium beef, especially if it's from the West Coast, out of high school, you got to do it. And they got Aiden Breland, they got Elijah Rushing, they got Jericho Johnson. I think I'm missing somebody else. They had one of the most talented defensive line classes in all of college football last year. It's smart, but it's also smart financially. You are protecting yourself long-term as well. Yeah, sure, you might have to bite the bullet, maybe overpay on the front end, but you'd much rather be in that market than a very oversaturated market and a very expensive market 2 to 3 years down the line. So I think that's kind of what we've seen. I don't think it's a quality. I think it's more of a quantity.
Coop, let me ask you this. Let's drop you at one of these West Coast schools. You're now the DPP at USC. What would your strategy be in terms of finding the big bodies locally?
I think yes. Well, locally, it's interesting because USC really wasn't involved with Aiden Breland, right? And Aiden Breland, we did our homework on. There was some other things that kind of came up, but you wonder, can USC really afford to be that picky and choosy at the defensive line spot. Or now, with the transfer portal, say, you know what, we'll take our chances, and we'll see what happens. And let's see if we can get this guy right. And if not, we'll move on quickly. But, I've seen the picture of USC's defensive line coach down there in Louisiana, in New Orleans at St. Augustine for Jakeem Stewart, right? They're in it for Justice Terry. They're in it for Isaiah Gibson. There's a part of it where you respect it. But there's also a part of it that says, all right, now that you're in it, right? There's a lot of now time that you are invested in players that are going to have, you're not like tangible in terms of that relationship, right? Yes, they come off a high when they come to a visit to USC and everything that is presented to them. You can see why you would be interested. But like, if Kirby Smart digs in on Justice Terry, if Kirby Smart digs in on Isaiah Gibson, good luck. And if you beat Kirby Smart head-to-head on two guys from the state of Georgia on defensive linemen that he wants, then good for you. That being said, I don't know if that's a battle that I would want to lock horns with, right? I would like to take my chances elsewhere. There are other opportunities that you can have if you early ID guys, you get them to campus, and then you have program awareness. What I mean by that is you have to understand your opponent and the opponent scouting, right? And the thing is with Kirby Smart, it's one thing if you're battling a guy from Texas that's down to Georgia and USC. It's another thing if you're battling a guy that's from Georgia, that has the wind at their back, that their supporting cast ultimately at the end of the day is going to say, you know what, everything else equal, player development equal, all those things, we want you closer to home. And guess what? Who's got a better track record of producing NFL defensive linemen and having guys not only getting paid in college, but in the NFL? That's Kirby Smart. So that's one use case. But if I'm USC, I got to be a little bit more tactful about where we are going to find our defensive linemen, what that's going to look like, So Midwest, a little bit more open, right? Texas, maybe you can get a little bit more involved there, but you got to be super, super intentional with how you're dealing with these big men. And Julian Lewis, Isaiah Gibson, Justice Terry, it all looks good right now, right? It all looks good right now. And ask Billy Napier about this last year, right? Nas Johnson looked good. The edge that ended up going to Auburn, they all look good. You got to have a pulse on these things, and you got to know, hey, do we really have what it takes to go in to the deepest part of enemy territory and really get this done? Those are the questions that you got to ask. There's a little bit of, it feels naive at times, and I'm sure a lot of people will scoff at that, but you got to look at this from a business standpoint. Ultimately, at the end of the day, we're operating in the spring. Push comes to shove, stuff's going to get really real in November and December, right? And that's the thing. Like, are you there? Are you tangible? Do you have people in their corner? Yeah, I get it, man. I'm all for it. Tip of the cap going after all these top dogs. But, I mean, New Orleans, not an easy place to recruit. You got to go through LSU. One state school there. Georgia, yeah, good luck. I mean, I say this all the time. Good luck. That's kind of the way I see it. So if you're California, if you're Oregon, like, here's the thing. Do you see Dan Lanning down there? I mean, I don't. I mean, there are some spot things situationally that you'll see. Maybe at some skill positions, maybe that he knows are maybe kind of vulnerable and they have the upper hand in selling. But, like, I don't know. Take it from a guy that used to work there. I think he kind of knows where the smart money is. So, loaded answer. But obviously, I'm very passionate about that because we had to do the same thing at UW, right? You got to develop these guys, bigger bodies, Hawaiian Islands. Like, yeah, you're going to take some guys that are a little bit raw, but there's dudes out there that you can develop there, right? So, it's a little bit of give and take.
Yeah, Oregon, 3 commits from California, 1 from Arizona, 1 from Illinois, 1 from Missouri, and 1 from Florida.
Hey, what do I know, right? I don't know. So we'll see. Drew, any final thoughts?
That's all I got, man. I got educated on West Coast footprint, right?
Yeah, big body. Trust me, man. I've thought about all the ways you can possibly add big bodies to that's the thing. How do you win a national championship on the West Coast? It starts up front. How do you do it? A lot of different ways to do it. A lot of different ways to skin a cat. obviously, we'll see. So we'll see what happens there. Guys, for Andrew Ivins, I'm Cooper Petagna. We appreciate you watching the show, as always, every Tuesday and Wednesday. You can find us on the 24/7 Sports YouTube channel. If you are watching on the YouTube channel, please make sure to like and subscribe. Also, if you're listening via airwaves, via podcast, make sure to leave a rating and a review. Guys, thanks again for stopping by. We'll see you tomorrow, same time.